Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Thrilling 32 Hall of Fame Induction, where each and every year, the Thrilling 32 Foundation selects a brand new roller coaster to enter into the Thrilling 32 Hall of Fame. Danny, can you tell us a little bit about the Thrilling 32 Foundation?
Absolutely. So, we came up with this last year, and this was sort of a way for us to recognize those rides that we felt were deserving. And we came up with a nice little mission statement here, which we'll read every year during this ceremony to kick it off and sort of let you know what this is all about. So the Thrilling 32 Hall of Fame aims to highlight those roller coasters, operating or defunct, that are deserving of special recognition for having a lasting impact on the amusement industry as selected by the Thrilling 32 Foundation, you and myself, the founders of the Thrilling 32, all that good stuff. And last year was the first year we did this. We did it at the conclusion of the Thrilling 32. And we felt it was timely and no more appropriate than to induct Dueling Dragons at Universal's Islands of Adventure last year as the inaugural inductee. We like to give a few reasons every year, and we inducted Dueling Dragons last year. We selected that for its technological innovation, its outstanding theme and backstory, and its aesthetic design and engineering. So, we talk a little bit each year throughout the Thrilling 32 offline about what we may induct. And this year we actually did ask for some suggestions from our Patreon folks with the understanding that it's still ultimately our decision, but we wanted to get some feedback and some suggestions from people. So that's sort of the gist of what this has been about. And each year we are going to select another ride, either operating or defunct, that we feel is deserving of that special recognition. So, Andy, would you like to announce this year's inductee?
Yes. So this year's inductee is officially Magnum XL 200 from Cedar Point, a well-deserved honor for Magnum, opening up in 1989. Danny, we have a few reasons of why we selected Magnum, but like our patron said, this ride I think kind of changed the game, and all of our patrons who said that Magnum was a good choice echoed these same things, Danny. But we boil it down into three distinct things, just like we did with Dragon Challenge. We boiled this down into three distinct things. So can you give us those three things why Magnum is deserving of this honor?
Yeah, we like to break it down into a couple reasons here. I'll list them here, and then we can dive into each one of them just briefly. But the reasons that we are selecting Magnum XL 200 at Cedar Point is, one, its record-breaking significance. Two, its overall industry impact and its inspiration on the industry. And finally, its longevity and its fan following. So let's hit on those just briefly. Let's talk first about the record-breaking significance, which is probably the most obvious, right? It was the first complete circuit to be 200 feet or taller, really established what we now know as the hypercoaster category, which is really sort of an ordinary category of roller coaster here in the year 2020. But 30 years ago,
Kings Island's putting one in this year.
Well, isn't that right? Another one. It sort of established that new genre, and we'll talk about industry impact and inspiration. We'll talk a little bit about how it broke the mold that was currently going on in the late 80s when we get to that. But as far as the record breakers go, Cedar Point's always been known for its record-breaking coasters, and Magnum XL 200 was no exception. And even though there had been record-breaking coasters before Magnum, Corkscrew, Gemini, certainly, Magnum was really sort of the one that solidified the notion that Cedar Point was the roller coaster capital of the world, and as the place where all the record-breaking coasters would happen. They would always do it first. They would do it bigger, badder, faster, longer than all the previous iterations of whatever the ride it was that they were building. Now, the three main records that Magnum broke when it opened was world's tallest complete circuit roller coaster, and it held that status for 5 years until 1994, when the big one opened at Blackpool Pleasure Beach over in England. And we're pulling this off of Wikipedia here. We just went to the easy source, right? And that's the one that's most well known, and sort of a derivative of that, the world's longest drop on a roller coaster. It held that one just until 1991, so just a couple of years. Remember, Steel Phantom at Kennywood opened and had a longer drop than Magnum. Magnum had surpassed Shockwave at Great America, and for that record, it had surpassed Great American Scream Machine for being the tallest. Scream Machine didn't have as long of a drop, Shockwave. And then world's fastest roller coaster, which it also held until 1991, until it was broken by the Steel Phantom at Kennywood as well. And it was preceded by the Bandit, which is the Togo mini hyper coaster that's over in Japan. And really, Bandit sort of served as the inspiration for Magnum. I remember Dick Kinzel had talked about, I think he even talked about it in the book, the biography there that you and I have both read, is he saw ads and different documents about Bandit. And that was sort of his inspiration of, a ride that's really tall, really fast, no over-the-shoulder restraints, no inversions, right? And this is sort of a good segue into our second reason here, this industry impact and inspiration. In the mid to late 80s, the industry was all about building coasters with more loops, finding new and different ways to turn people upside down. Arrow was at the forefront of that, building rides like Shockwave, Great American Scream Machine, and then in 1990, Viper at Six Flags Magic Mountain. Viper at Darien Lake was a few years earlier. Vortex at Kings Island, which has just been pushed to defunct status. All these massive rides with multiple loops, corkscrews, bat wings, all these different types of elements, boomerangs, all these different things. It was all about going upside down. And then Bandit, and then of course Magnum, really broke that mold, and it was something completely different. And Kinzel, he sent bids out. He had Togo, Intamin, Arrow. I think he had a couple other companies as well, sort of pitch designs, and they selected Arrow. And originally, Magnum was not going to be that 200-foot coaster. Originally, it was only pitched as 187. And I think it was Dick Kinzel who kind of said, why not go to 200? Why not do it? We can be the first to do it. And that is sort of the reputation that Cedar Point had. They established it then and for many years on. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but it was almost a shock when Magnum was announced and then built that it didn't have any loops, because that was the big thing at that point.
Well, Mike Flynn said it on the Patreon post as well. This was the age of the mega loopers. And you went through the whole history of it there. And I will just say thank you for stopping that trend, because to think of rides that have more and more loops, like Smiler, you're talking about 20 years in the future now. Smiler does it well. But to shift that focus now on other things outside of loops, and that massive first drop on Magnum, the airtime on Magnum, probably is the most shocking thing about the whole ride. Airtime that you don't get on the mega loopers very much. Like, you get a little pop here and there, but going into that hill past the lake, and you get that pop of air going in there, and then you go out onto the pretzel loop, and you come on the return run with the major ejector air you get out of those seats. Shifting that focus from loops to airtime, I think, changed everything, changed the whole game. And it's that whole industry shift then that goes along with it. It's not just one ride. It's every ride after that. You look at some of the big B&M hypers. They focus on, and there's always been the debate between floater air versus ejector air. We're not going to get into that here, but Magnum kind of has both on it too. On the big hills, you get that floater air. On the return run on the bunny hills, you get the ejector air. So here's a ride that gives you both styles in a nice compact package and nice out and back layout, very simplistic. But it kind of broke the mold, and you see everyone then from that point forward trying to go in that route. And the other thing is too, is you don't see a whole lot of the mega loopers anymore. And you could argue that that might be because of the inverts, where the inverts kind of took on that inversion record thing for themselves and said, hey, the inverts are a better way to send people upside down than maybe a standard sit-down coaster. But we don't really see a whole lot of hypers from that point forward having the inversions on it. Very rarely do you see it now. You look at all the B&M hypers, none of them have inversions on them. You look at Mac sometimes has just recently started to put inversions back on these huge coasters, these hyper coasters. And now we see all these new coasters out there trying to bring styles of inversions back, half inversions, not full inversions, maybe a barrel roll here or there. And they're breaking the height barrier in different ways now, not in your standard sense. But Magnum not only broke the standard in '89, but then that standard was carried through for the next decade or two.
Well, and that's the big thing, right? Because, lots of people say that Magnum XL 200 sort of started the coaster wars. A lot of people like to say that because then you had eventually Intamin and then B&M and then later on these other companies that sort of started to try and mimic that hypercoaster format. And it was kind of Aero who did it for a while by themselves. I mean, you had Big One, you had Desperado. In Japan, you had Titan. You had these other rides that Aero did that did the same sort of thing. But then as you got into the late 90s, you had Intamin with the Superman rides, and then you had Apollo's Chariot, you had Raging Bull. Then you eventually get on to the rides like Nitro and your Goliaths, and then later on your Behemoths, your Diamondbacks, Intimidators, all those rides. Your Silver Star came in there earlier. But it took many, many years to even see these other companies sort of try to mimic that style. It was sort of Aero's thing for a while. So yes, it started the coaster wars, but don't forget that it wasn't an immediate thing because the other companies didn't jump all over that right away. It was still sort of Aero's thing, and it was sort of Magnum's claim to fame for really a decade before we started getting these other big coasters at the end of the 20th century from these other companies. But that's sort of like the second golden age of coasters, right? If the first golden age of coasters was in the 1920s, the second golden age was in the late 80s, 1990s into the early 2000s, I think. But let's not lose sight of that. The coaster wars, like we said, were already going on in the 1980s because when we discovered the corkscrew in 1975 with Corkscrew and then the vertical loop with Revolution and Super Duper Looper in 76, 77, really in the mid 70s is when we started to see this resurgence of theme parks. That's when wood coasters started coming back. There was only a handful of new wooden coasters built from the 1930s until the 1970s. You had the Conneaut Blue Streak, you had the Cedar Point Blue Streak, you had a handful of other wood coasters built from the 30s to the 70s, but really in the 70s we got some wood coasters and then we started getting the inversions. And from 1975 until 1989, it was all about inversions. And there was really 15 years worth of coaster wars about how to do the inversions the best, doing them the biggest, and then with Magnum XL 200 in 1989, it changed the coaster wars and started a new coaster wars from what was already going on. And then Kennywood, 1991, you had them try to combine Magnum XL 200 with the Mega Loopers of the late 80s. And some people love Steel Phantom, but a lot of people disliked it because it was very rough. It was too intense. I never rode the original Steel Phantom. I know people who rode the original one that loved it. I know people who rode the original one that hated it. And what did Steel Phantom turn into at the turn of the millennium? It turned into really something that Magnum would be proud of. It turned into a modern day Magnum XL 200. And then again, Morgan Manufacturing, who did the work on Phantom's Revenge with your Wild Things, your Steel Forces, your Mambas in the late 90s. And again, I talked about Intamin and B&M already. So you had so many more companies start to mimic that once Magnum became the success it did. And it also proved that the combination didn't always work, right? So it was one or the other. And Magnum was also the first coaster to really show us that, you know what, coming out of your seat is a hell of a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. The ejector air that you get, and you could say that maybe some of the old wood coasters gave that same sort of air time that you've talked about. Older wood coasters like the coaster at PNE. Not that you get major airtime on that. Phoenix, you get airtime. So it's not like Magnum invented the airtime. But
no, but Magnum sort of, if I can say this, Magnum made it scary. Magnum is a scary roller coaster. Even to this day, Magnum is one of the, if we can say that we're scared of roller coasters, which we're not, but if there's a handful of rides that scare me and make me feel like I'm actually going to come out of the ride, Magnum XL 200 has always been one of those rides and still is to this day. And maybe that's a good segue into our third point here, the longevity of Magnum XL 200.
And if you have the ability to, on that point right there, if you have the ability to ride Magnum without a lap bar, would you do it?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
No. Phoenix, I might be able to get away with it. Coaster at PNE Playland, I might be able to get away with that. I might be able to hold myself in. Magnum XL 200, there is no chance I am keeping myself in that ride with that lap bar. And thank God Aero knew what they were doing as far as lap bars go, because that is the only thing separating me from a landing in Lake Erie.
Like, I'll tell you what, even with the lap bar, you get so far off that seat, and assuming you're not stapled or anything, my shirt routinely comes up over the seat back.
It's an undresser.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just imagine that if you didn't have that lap bar there, you didn't have a seatbelt there, like that would be, if you just had something to hang on to, like that handle in front of you, you'd be in for a real far fall probably, because I'll tell you what, that ride just wants to throw you out. And that's why I think Magnum sometimes gets that negative connotation, because people might be a little bit afraid, and they say that they turn that sense of legitimate fear into, oh well, this is real rough. Well, yeah, it's not a smooth ride. It's trying to throw you out. That's going to be a rough process most of the time. So I sometimes wonder if fear translates into people saying, oh, well, that's too rough and I don't want to ride it anymore.
Well, and you know what? That makes the line shorter for those of us that enjoy riding Magnum XL 200. But and we sort of segued into the longevity and fan following here. And we do the Thrilling 32, we do the Ride Warrior Choice Awards. We don't historically like to talk about the golden tickets a whole lot anymore. We might reference them from time to time, and I know that people don't always agree with the golden tickets, and that's fine. We're not here to debate that. But I'm going to reference the golden tickets here to make a point talking about the longevity and fan following. Because, yes, is the golden tickets skewed towards ace people? Maybe. Fine. That's fine. I don't care. Whether or not you agree with the golden tickets, you cannot deny that there is a large group of theme park and amusement park enthusiasts that vote in the golden tickets. And regardless of whether or not you agree with them, there is a large number of people who year after year rank this ride very highly with all the new rides that we have coming out. Intamin, Mach, B&M, RMC, all these amazing companies that are building outstanding rides year after year after year. Let me read off some stats for you. The golden tickets from 1998, which I think is when they started. 1998, 9 years after Magnum XL 200 opened, right? Magnum, number one. 1999, number one. 2000, number one. 2001, number three. And that's when I think Millennium Force finally took over number one. 2002, number three. 2003, number four. 2004, 2005, 2006, all number three. 2007, number five. 2008, number seven. 2009, number 9, 2010, number 8, 11, number 10, 2012, number 8, 13, number 9. Even with all these other Intamin hypercoasters, B&M hypercoasters, the Morgan hypercoasters, all the way up to 2013, Magnum XL 200 was always in the top 10 of the Golden Ticket Awards. And that's far beyond, I'm sure, anyone would have ever imagined. Even in 14 and on through, it's been in the teens. In 2017, it was number 23, which is the lowest it's ever been. But it's always been in the mid-teens, even in the last handful of years here. So whether or not you are a Magnum XL 200 fan or not, there is no doubt that there is a huge fan following. There always has been. And whether or not it's the best ride in the world here in 2020, you cannot deny that it holds a special place in people's hearts. And whether it's for the historical significance and all these other things we talked about, who cares? Because it's at Cedar Point, who cares? Magnum XL 200 to this day, over 30 years after it's open, is still an outstanding ride and is still one of the most fun roller coasters in the world to ride.
Absolutely. And I've ridden Magnum a whole lot through my life. Did Coasting for Kids a number of years, where we did marathons on Magnum. And I just don't understand the people who criticize it. And it's still in my top 10. I still think it's a fantastic roller coaster. I've been on roller coasters all over the place. And guess what? Magnum is still one of my favorite rides to ride each and every time. The stuff that thing does, people are still trying to recreate those types of experiences, and still don't really find the right mix of it, the right balance of it. And Magnum does that stuff perfectly. And I think the numbers that you just read off there are indicative of this. That this shows us that for a very, very long time, Magnum was the best ride in the entire world. That if we are to use those numbers as fact, what was the last year it was number one?
It was number one.
2003?
98, 99, and 2000. And then in 2001, it dropped to number 3. And then from there, it was 3, 3, 4, 3, 3, 3, 5, 7, 9, 8.
Yeah, so we can assume then that for a decade, I know there were no golden tickets, that for a decade, though, this was the best roller coaster in the world. Just crazy to think about. And it's just that good of a roller coaster. And so when we look at the rides deserving of the honor of the Hall of Fame, the one thing we didn't want this to become, something where a ride had to close in order for it to be honored.
Yeah, this isn't going. We didn't want this to be a memorial for rides that are no more. That's why we specifically said operating or defunct. And Dueling Dragons last year was defunct, but we thought it was appropriate for the reasons we listed. Magnum, which is an operating roller coaster, and hopefully is operating for far longer than the year 2020. I mean, that's why.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a ride that you said isn't closed, is hopefully operating for a very, very long time. But it's a ride that changed the game. And we might not be talking about roller coasters in the way that we talk about them right now if it wasn't for Magnum XL 200 that set the world on fire. People got excited about this ride. People got to Cedar Point and started attending the park so that you could set an attendance record. Without Magnum, there is no attendance record in 1994 for Raptor.
That's right.
There is none, because the people wouldn't have even known what Cedar Point was, because that attitude of building big, building the best was established with Magnum and then carried through all the way to the 90s into the 2000s. And we still have that today with the best roller coaster in the world being there right across from Magnum with Steel Vengeance. And it's crazy to think, Danny, it's crazy to think that you have 3 legitimate #1 roller coasters sitting in the same park, steps away from each other. Legitimate #1s as voted upon by different groups of people in different eras and different times, but you have 3 legitimate #1 roller coasters sitting there in the same park right now. Crazy to think about.
No, I absolutely agree with everything you said, and I think we hit on all the points perfectly. I mean, Magnum is deserving of special recognition. It's had a lasting impact on the industry for the reasons we talked about. It was an all-time record breaker and a real record breaker, not these cheesy records that we come up with here in 2020 to try and sell a ride. Magnum actually did it. It was the tallest. It was the fastest. It was
no asterisk. No asterisk.
That's the thing. It had that lasting impact. It inspired the rest of the industry to do something new or to do something different or to mimic it. Often imitated, never duplicated, right? That common phrase. I think Magnum can be described like that perfectly. There's lots of other rides and lots of other parks that have tried to do the same things that Magnum does. And you can argue whether or not some of the newer rides do it better, but there is certainly not another ride out there quite like Magnum XL 200. Certainly some similar rides like Desperado, which who knows if we'll ever see that run again. There's a lot of Magnum in Desperado, but there's something different about Magnum that gives it sort of that special place in our hearts. And again, the fact that to this day it remains such a significant part of the amusement industry and a fan favorite still. I couldn't think of a more deserving ride this year to induct into the Thrilling 32 Hall of Fame than Magnum XL 200 at Cedar Point.
So the last thing we're going to do here is I've actually been creating a little Hall of Fame back there. If you see, so there we go. So back there in the corner, we got the Dueling Dragons back there. So I'm creating a little kind of like action figure Hall of Fame. So we have our next inductee right here. Oh, look at that!
There you go.
The good old Magnum. So I kind of styled it a little bit off of the old ride sign that was out front of the Magnum ride. So the old height sign that they used to do. And what's interesting is it's kind of a mix of what the ride sign was. It's very stormtrooper-ish. If you ever looked at the train, even the train itself has a lot of stormtrooper-esque, connotations to it with the side panels that are now stickers. They used to be 3D panels. They're now stickers that have like that Empire-like feeling. The white trains have that stormtrooper feeling. So the character out front had a stormtrooper-like feeling too. But what was interesting is I found concept art for that ride sign that was up in the Melt restaurant at Cedar Point. So they put up all the concept art too. And the concept art of that ride sign was a little bit different than what the ride sign actually ended up being. It was more angular, more scary. So I kind of try and mix the two different things together to make our new little action figure there, our Magnum figure. Plus he's got his little gun that has the classic blue for the tunnels and then the motley orange there for the tip there. So he will be joining the Dueling Dragons back there in our Hall of Fame. So if you ever come to Chicago, you can buy tickets to come see the Hall of Fame. We actually have a physical Hall of Fame now. So.
No, that's good stuff. This is a lot of fun. And so with that, we sort of wrap up and conclude what has really been the 2 months of the Ride Warrior Choice Awards and the Thrilling 32. We had voting going on in the winter before the holidays, before the new year. But really for the last 2 months, it's been talking about the brackets and filling out the brackets and then revealing round by round the winners. And then, of course, concluding it here today with our Hall of Fame induction ceremony. I'm really glad that we came up with this last year. And I think this is a very, very fitting way to wrap this up each and every year. We talk about the best roller coasters in the world as it currently stands, and then we finish up by maybe reflecting back on some rides that we don't talk about during the Thrilling 32 and we get to recognize them here. So again, congratulations, Cedar Point and Magnum XL 200. Cedar Point won again with Steel Vengeance this year, and they get a little added bonus with Magnum this year as well.
So as always, I am Andy Robarchuk from Chicago, Illinois.
I'm Danny Miller from Binghamton, New York.
Right on, Red Warriors.
Thanks, guys. See you next time.